in the Institute of Education have been around a long time, and we have been through a whole series of phases of different types of course delivery, moving from what was fundamentally a summer school that was set up to bring students from overseas at a time of the last recession, or the first recession I was involved in as an academic, and we've now gone through all of the kind of range of different types of distance learning, and we're now fully online, and we're increasingly using synchronous tools as well as the typical virtual learning tools that most of us are familiar with. And I wanted to talk today about bridging some of the gaps, partly as an academic in a busy, research-intensive university, thinking about working in distance learning, but also to talk about my interest in social media. As I come from a background in language teaching, English language teaching specifically, TESOL, then using a variety of tools is inevitably part of the domain that I inhabit. So, you might see this as partial in the sense that, I'm somebody for whom trying to get people to engage and communicate and explore different tools is something that's part and parcel of what you would expect me to do. But I think that it's quite easy to see ways of making what you do as an academic kind of efficient and be able to use that both in your regular face-to-face classes but also at a distance. And there are lots of reasons for thinking about that. Now, if you want to get at these slides, this is a shortened URL. I'll leave it up on the screen briefly. It's a Google URL. And these slides are done through Google Presentation because this is one of the ways that I find it easy to be able to bring my materials together more quickly and more easily. So all of the presentations I pretty much do these days are done through Google Presentation rather than using PowerPoint. And then, as I'll show you in a bit, I can then embed them into my courseware quickly and easily. So, everybody got that? We wanted to get it? It comes back at the end as well, just in case you missed it. All right. So what is social media? Or what are social media? I couldn't quite decide what is, what are. But I went for is, because that's what Google told me. So what do you think? Tell me, what do you expect me to talk about? What do people expect me to talk about? Facebook, yes. Twitter. Snapchat, maybe. Online communication and collaboration. Wikis, yes. All of those things. Okay, so here are a few of the little icons that most of you will be familiar with. And of course, these things have exploded, maybe in our worlds, but certainly in the worlds of our students. And, oops, I've got to press the right button. So I sort of cheated, and I did what I imagine a lot of people will do. Maybe this is something that academics frown on, but I think this is what a lot of people do. I thought, oh, okay, I'm going to do this talk. I'll just have a quick skirt around the web. And I found some interesting pages on the BBC. So if I were going to actually do some work with a group of students or talking to them about social media, I might point them to this. They're a little bit old, but they give a kind of foundational insight into social media, which I thought were quite fun. And then, of course, I had a look at Wikipedia. Who wouldn't? I'm sure you all do, even though you might not admit it. And I found this quite neat kind of framing for the talk. I was trying to decide how I was going to do this talk. I thought this was quite a neat framework. But if you want to go the traditional route and you want something that's edited properly by a stand-up publisher, then there's a really good book I would recommend to anybody by Megan Paul. This is a really nice introduction to using social media in the classroom. She doesn't really talk about distance learning, but she talks about it in lots of different ways. And she goes through in quite an academic way, but also with lots of practical ideas. So she talks about communication and computer-mediated communication, and then she shows you what tools, and she divides it up into neat ways. But anyway, I'm going to use not all of these, because I don't say that I use all of these tools in what I do. So I keep pressing the wrong button. So why use them? And it's a question, it's interesting, one of my colleagues in the Institute, Susan Brown, did a survey and interviews a couple of years ago, perhaps, maybe 3 years ago, where she went round, she talked to various academics from different parts of the university about, whether they would do, or whether they wouldn't, and why they wouldn't use social media in their teaching. And she got some really interesting responses. So, I mean, you can look her up, Susan Brown, use of Web2 tools, and it showed how different disciplines might view this kind of thing. So I come from, if you like, the fluffy end of the academic client. I'm in education, and we do a lot of very practical things in the work that we do. We work directly with teachers, working with them to try and get them to engage in classrooms with learners, and it fits within their raison d'etre, whereas maybe for other people it doesn't. So I'm going to tell you a little anecdote. This was one of those things, serendipitous things that happened. Somebody emailed me from within our school. A student came from geography to talk to me about social media. I thought this was interesting. I wasn't sure who sent her, but she said, we've heard that you know something about these things and you do this undergraduate course. So she came to talk to me about it. And she was talking about the way that she works with a group of her peers. And I found this absolutely fascinating. She was saying, well, in the past, what we might have done if we were set a bit of group work is we would try and find a physical time to meet, and then we would try and find some other physical times to meet, and with all the constraints now, having a job, maybe having to travel because, what do we call distance learners? Interesting issue, what we mean by distance learners. And I'll come back to that point in a bit. But she said, but now what we do is we get onto Facebook, we set up a little Facebook group, and then we sort out all of the basic stuff, and maybe we have a Skype meeting. And then we'll come together, perhaps they're doing a presentation, we come together for one meeting, whereas before they might have had 4 or 6 meetings, face-to-face, in a space, somewhere around the university or maybe in a pub or something like that. What they do now is they do a lot of the pre-arrangement around social media. And then we do that presentation, or then we submit that piece of work to the school as an assignment. And I thought, I wonder how many academics realise that that's going on in the background. It's certainly, interesting. I thought it was quite a nice little anecdote, and gave me some insights more into the way that students work. So there are other things as well that I think we could spend a lot of time talking about, but I've only got half an hour, although I'm not quite sure when that half an hour is supposed to end, so you might like to sort of wave at me when you think you should get me to end. So there are lots of areas we could talk about, the changing nature of the way that we do education, in higher education hopefully, but across the educational domain. And also the other thing that, the other sort of gap that I'm interested in narrowing, as I mentioned before, is that gap between this sort of stuff. This is being recorded. We have an automatic system here that picks up on the slides and my voice and sends it to a server somewhere. I've never done this before. I work in this university, but I don't normally teach in this kind of large lecture theatre. So this is being recorded, and lots of decisions were made about how it should work, but this is kind of being created as I speak. And one of the things that it seems to me is that we can quickly take this piece of material, and not only can we put it online and use it as a record of this particular event, but we could use that as a piece of distance learning. So if I'm going to do a talk around social media for my students, instead of having to redo it and get somebody in to record it and get it edited and all that kind of stuff, or do all that sort of thing myself, because that's the kind of thing I get up to, it's automatic. it's a very quick way of doing those things. So it narrows that gap between me as an academic talking to what is typical kind of teaching, I imagine, in this university and many universities around the world, but using a technology, a digital technology to actually support that. So some of the other things that I'll go through as we go through this talk. So I'm going to use some of those headings that came off Wikipedia, and I'm going to talk about some of the different ways that I use social media now. So collaborative projects, I use a lot of wikis. Kathy possibly mentioned wiki there to actually, because I like wikis and I think they're very useful. And this came from an idea, we have at this university teaching and learning showcases. And the Faculty of Humanities particularly runs a couple of these every year. And I went to a presentation by a guy called James Evans, and he was talking about the way that he used Wikipedia. And he got his students to go onto Wikipedia and look for subjects that they were interested in and start editing it. All right, so they would go, they would find a particular topic and they would do that. And I thought, okay, that's going to work for a while, but it's not going to work. You know, you could do it for a couple of years and then you kind of probably run out of spaces because people would have really, made those subject areas sort of top notch. So I thought, okay, well, maybe I could just use an ordinary wiki and I could get my students to use this wiki in a similar kind of way, but not actually engaging with Wikipedia because there's only so many times you can edit the same page in Wikipedia. They will probably get quite miffed. And in fact, if you look on that a Wikipedia page about social media, at the bottom it's got 3 or 4 examples of education, and one of them was about that kind of thing. And Wikipedia did get annoyed because so many people were trying to edit the same page at the same time, they just couldn't cope with it, basically. So there are issues to bear in mind. So I then I offered to run this undergraduate course on social media and education, and that's exactly what I do. I use a wiki, but I don't put all my materials, and that's not how I started. I don't put the materials in, the students do that. So they're sent off to do various bits of reading or viewing of different kinds of social media, so they look at YouTube and other kinds of tools, and then they build an actual wiki on the basis of that. Now, I'm going to try and just quickly show you that. See whether it will work. That probably means my slides have gone off. So it's relatively simple thing to do. This one uses PB Works. Oh no, it doesn't. This one uses Wikispaces and now called sort of Wikispaces Classroom. And this is quite an easy tool to get the hang of, and the students find it very quick and easy to get the hang of. And we do a number of different things. So they produce a piece of video, they do various searches and summaries of articles. They have to do a presentation via Adobe Connect as well, so we have Adobe Connect as part of the technologies that we use at Manchester, and they're given an example of how they do that, and they have to go away remotely and present it. So that's one example. So you can actually use that directly within teaching. Now that's an undergraduate course that I teach face-to-face, although you could argue pretty strongly that that is blended. And one of the slight weaknesses of this is when you go to, you actually go out of this, of presentation, it seems to lose the actual presentation mode, which is a bit of a drag. So I then started thinking a bit more about these things, and whoops, I was noticing we got a lot of our students saying, well, what happens at the end of the course unit? Can I still access the material? I've been interested in open educational resources for a while, and I thought, well, how can I solve that problem for them? We would tell them, okay, you can go to Blackboard and you can download all the materials, but of course it goes out of date. So I thought, I wonder if I could use a wiki to do that. And initially, again, this started as a blended project. But what I've done now is I took my courseware that I used for my face-to-face class, which is blended, and I've imported that into my distance course. Now I have had to spend some time readjusting it a little bit, changing things around, setting the tasks up. So this is the material, the input material that the students engage with, and then I use Blackboard for discussion, for submission of assignments, as a kind of portal, if you like. So I still use Blackboard as our VLE on this course unit, but this is the material that the students make use of. And what this includes, so this is a wiki, but it also includes other kinds of digital resources as well. This is actually the video, a clip from the video server at Manchester. And what I do is I interlink the two bits. So I have little icons on the wiki that take them back to Blackboard, and I have links out of Blackboard that take them to the wiki. So I integrate the two things together, and it's pretty easy to do that. You just grab the URLs and actually work like that. So that's one type of resource. But I also use things like PDFs. So it refers to a paper handout there. You might not be able to see that. And I have that on a Dropbox. All right? So I put my all of my PDFs or my handouts into the Dropbox, and again, I link this into the wiki. And this uses here a spreadsheet. This spreadsheet there is sits again. This one actually sits in the Google Drive as part of the Google Docs. And this one is a video that's up on YouTube. So this is actually a proper film video. So, when you talk about video, there are different kinds of videos and the different bits of video that are on here. So this was something that I commissioned from our technician. He came in and filmed a group of students doing this activity. But what I do a lot of the time is I create my own screencasts, as they're called. Again, I'm not quite sure what people may be or may not be aware of the terminology, but I'm in the lucky position that I have a Mac somewhere sitting on there, and you can use the actual resources that are built into the Mac to create an immediate screencast. So last night, one of the students pointed out, there's a problem with this bit of material. So I could go onto my laptop and I could quickly create an updated version of that piece of material, put it up onto my YouTube channel and link it into my wiki, and then put an announcement up onto Blackboard saying, there was a problem with this piece of material, it's now solved. So that's talking to somebody who's sitting in Colombia. So I got a message in from Colombia, one of my distant students, saying, there's a problem with your material, and could you sort it out for me? So using a screencast, I could quickly adjust and make a difference there. Okay, so I'm building that kind of thing using that kind of material. So again, there's another example of an actual proper video, if you like. Let me see if I can find one that's actually a screencast. Whoops, sorry, it slipped back. Okay, well, I'll come back to that in a minute because I'll show you some things. So, so that's sort of collaborative projects, and then you can't see that at the bottom there, but what I've also started doing is getting students to work with the wiki to actually create mini assignments. So as part of the assignment work that they do the sort of thing that I started talking about at the beginning, what James Evans suggested, which was they produce a joint essay that they put in a wiki, and they use the collaborative features of the wiki to actually work and edit it in that kind of way. So that's collaborative projects. So what about blogs, microblogs? And I put Evernote on there as well because I've kind of included that in because I find Evernote a really useful tool. For a while I've used WordPress, and I use it. I actually do have that particular blog there is our sort of group blog where we put up information about courses and people winning prizes and all that kind of stuff. But I've also developed an actual course unit through the blog as well. So you can use a blog like WordPress. It's an open source piece of software. You can create a piece of material in that, and you can build a forum into it and all those kinds of things. And I do that. It's not what I'm expecting everybody to do, but I do that partly because I'm trying to illustrate these things to my students, how these things might work. So if you've not got access to a typical VLE, you can do that kind of stuff as well. We use blogs a lot for reflection as well. You can use any type of blog for that, and in fact what I increasingly use now is Evernote. I get the students to use Evernote. And what I want to pilot next year is using Evernote as a portfolio. I'm working on a research project with a primary school in London where they're doing exactly that. They're getting their kids in this school, an absolutely fascinating project, to use Evernote as a tool to actually reflect on their learning in all sorts of ways. So the other example that I like to quote, again, this is not something I particularly do. This is, again, another, you can find this link on the Humanities, Faculty of Humanities web pages. Andrew Russell, fascinating use of Twitter to teach electoral politics. Now, he starts off the article we have a newsletter here that the faculty produces. Fascinating little article where he starts off, well, I was a bit sceptical about these kinds of things, and then I went to this conference. And he heard all of these other people talking about the way that they use social media in their teaching. So he thought he'd have a go at this. And this little article talks about this. So all of these links are live. You can go and have a look at that for yourselves if you're interested in that. So you can use it. I use Twitter. I have a hashtag, which relates to my course. What I do is when I have announcements that I want to make to my students, I tell them about that. Not everybody necessarily signs up for it, but it's one way that I distribute announcements to the students. It's another way of getting at people. It's surprising what they pick up on. So I've mentioned YouTube. I started off using Vimeo. I used Vimeo because it allowed longer chunks of video, but I'm now allowed a YouTube channel because I posted with it for long enough. I'm a trusted user. I don't think it takes very long these days to get trusted user status, and probably you don't want to be putting up videos that are much longer than about 10 or 15 minutes anyway. But you can use YouTube, and as I say, you can integrate that directly into the materials. Now, as an academic who travels the world as part of my work, I often get video recorded by other people, and that gets put into various places. And some of those things get put either onto Vimeo or YouTube or other spaces, and then again I can port those directly into my teaching. So I did a talk recently at a conference. I think that would make quite a nice sort of summary of some of the issues that I talk about in terms of my work. And I can build that either into my wiki or I can put it into Blackboard as well if I want. So another recommendation that people might make is to use SlideShare for storing your PowerPoint slides, and then you can also begin to build up a little portfolio of these kinds of materials. But I think even though Google Presentations doesn't have quite that kind of social media type buzz around it. Of course, if you put something on SlideShare, you can build up a community and you can bring people into that. Actually, for me, in a sense, for working with student materials to give them that feeling that they're getting something a little bit exclusive, I think that works quite neatly. And one of the things I wanted to illustrate for people who perhaps don't know this is that if you're actually looking at these slides, if anybody's got an iPad or laptop, you can look at these slides. If you go to that link, what I've done is I've shared it. So I've made it available so anybody can actually comment on it. So if I've got a group of students, you could use this in a lecture capture type not a lecture capture, in a situation where you want to get feedback from students, you could actually comment on a particular part of the slide as I'm actually doing the presentation. or you could ask students, you could put up a set of slides and you could get people to put in comments about ideas, about additional materials that they might suggest that you might use, or whatever it happens to be. So I think that's a really useful feature of the tool. So I mean, I can show you that. So there, I was doing this with my daughter last night, just to sort of see if we could. I was actually thinking of getting her to put a few sneaky comments on, but then I thought, so you can put, anybody can put, I've just had to do it myself. So, at that slide there, what is social media? Then the cheeky comment would be, why not ask the audience rather than actually sort of tell people about it? And then, I sort of covered the thing by saying, should you be encouraging people to use Wikipedia as part of, the work that they do? So these kind of tools have all sorts of possibilities in terms of what you want to do. So Facebook, somebody mentioned Facebook over there. I've done a little bit of work with Facebook, not particularly because I'm that enamored with Facebook, but it is moving, isn't it? Very rapidly to being, it's almost, it can almost be a VLE. And one of the things that the students on the social media and education course unit actually said in the reflective part of the assignment that they do for me was that, yes, they thought that Facebook was a good idea, but the moment they entered it and they saw my posting, they got distracted. All right? So they were off doing other things on Facebook that weren't about the educational process. And I thought that was a pretty interesting insight. We do have a Facebook group for the MA TESOL that we run, and it's very helpful in terms of management. I found it really useful at the beginning of the year when people were struggling to get into the courses. And certainly some of the beginning of January as well, when students were sort of struggling to find particular courses. Where is it? What do we have to do here? And they were putting messages up on Facebook, and because my Facebook is linked to my email account, it was pushing information in. Now it calmed down, as it always does. If it was coming in, every day, hundreds of messages, then it would be really problematic. But, people post particular things about the community, they ask questions, and it's also a way of sending information quickly to them. They're much more likely to read what you put on Facebook than they will if you send them an email at postgraduate.manchester.ac.uk. And in fact, so many of them don't read it. It's actually quite worrying, really. So, these are ways you could think about using for teaching. I think there are sort of limitations to the interface, but in terms of actually building the community around your course, which is one of the important aspects of it, it does help do that. And if people get stuck and they can't find things, they're much more likely to put that on Facebook or send you a little text message than they are to actually post you an email. That's what I find anyway. Now, I do make use of a little bit of use of virtual social worlds. I recognise that for many people, these are not something that perhaps register on their frame of reference. But in language learning, there's still quite a lot of activity that goes on in these sorts of virtual worlds. And this was a recent seminar that we ran inside the virtual world, where actually the students here are running around, jumping, flying, dancing, and all that kind of stuff. And they loved it. I thought it was, I wasn't particularly keen on it, but there's a dance ball there at the front. And they got a sense of enjoyment out of it. They want to do some more of it because it was fun and it wasn't all kind of academic. So it's about building that sort of social connectivity between your distance learning students and you as a tutor. So you don't have to do it in that kind of way, but it's certainly a possibility. One of the things I've not mentioned very much, I've talked a little bit about video, but as I say, we use video conferencing software quite a lot on our course units. And again, we find that's a good way of binding the students together. It's also a good way of managing the course. But the other thing about that is, of course, if you use a tool like Adobe Connect, you can record it. So again, you can record. We've got a presentation from a guy in Germany who's doing some really interesting work around using Minecraft in education. He's doing a presentation on Friday morning at 10 o'clock in our Adobe Connect room. I will then record that and I'll integrate that into the course. So I will put it up and I'll link it directly onto the wiki. So, and then obviously post for students who couldn't attend it, make an announcement through Blackboard. This is now available for you to view as an additional kind of resource. So we can use those kinds of social media to actually make connectivity and to do other things as well. So I'm going to stop there, which is about half an hour. I think I started a bit earlier. And yeah.
Thanks very much, Gary. I think there are some really imaginative ways of using social media in your teaching there and some useful tips as well. Are there any questions for Gary? Yeah?
Hi, Gary.
Hiya.
You clearly use lots of tools outside of Blackboard. I just wondered, to generate or do your students generate any content within Blackboard at all? Or do you do everything outside?
It depends on the course unit. For the particular ones that I'm talking about, a lot of the material, I mean, what do you mean by the students generating material? You mean, do they use things like the blogs inside?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do they generate? Do you produce your teaching learning materials in any materials within Blackboard, or the students use?
Yes, we do. We use the forums. We have used the blogs in the past for reflective purposes. But one of those course units now not inside it. So yes, we do use some of the tools within it. Certainly the forums I use on some of the course units. Yes.
As a maths teacher, it's very hard to, write symbols and everything, blogs and all that. Create the content, equations and integration and all that. Do these softwares support them?
I think in terms of, I mean, I'm not an expert in the teaching of, maths and physics and that kind of stuff where you use a lot of symbols. There are certainly alternative ways of doing that. You can certainly use tools like whiteboards to actually do presentations and record them. I mean, there might be other people in the e-learning teams around the audience who might be able to answer that question better than I can, or people who work in the more scientific disciplines. I don't know if anybody has any experience of doing that, but I know that you can do that and you can record those kinds of things. And I mean, you have the Khan Academy, for example, where he does a lot of his presentations using YouTube. You could sort of film those kinds of activities and use them and then integrate them in. But so that's a possibility.
Yeah,
So,
just help. If you've got an iPad, there's certainly many apps for doing that type of creation, such as Edu Creations is one. There's a number of ways, and it will record anything you do on the screen and can export it, and then you embed that into your Blackboard course. So it's a case of us, with all of this, is knowing what you want to do. And if you're certainly going to draw anything, it's dead simple. But equally, there's quite a lot of these other apps will do those things for you. Do have a good look around. There's a lot out there to help you.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I've never really done any work like this where students share online comments and so on. Is there starting to be a limit in size as to how useful these tools can be? So if you have 100 students reading 100 comments on the same thing, that's start being too much? Is there an ideal class size? Or?
Is there an ideal class size? I mean, if you look at what the Open University do, for example, I mean, in the way that they run their massive courses, then they have a tutor for every 20 students, approximately. And I think you can certainly set up groups inside tools like Blackboard. So if you've got a large class, 1,000 students in a class, you could have it broken down into small groups. And certainly I know that here we, graduate teaching assistants then work with those groups. So it's not a tutor sort of doing all that processing. So yes, there are optimal sizes to groups. I think it gets much beyond 20, it does become problematic with lots and lots of material. And as a tutor, you can't keep up with that kind of stuff either. So, yeah, I mean, the students don't read it through because there's too much of it. So I think you've got to break them down. Yeah. Yep.
How do you get students to actually do this? Do you mark it, or you just hope that they'll do it?
I mean, I don't hope that they'll do it. I set up tasks in a way that it requires them to engage in certain kinds of activity. I mean, and different. It's the same old question about how many people are actually engaging in a particular lecture theatre at any time. How do we get the people to do that stuff, to engage with the ideas that are being presented to them? You have to think your way through tasks that hopefully are interesting enough to get people to actually engage and do the stuff. But not everybody's going to do it, unfortunately. I mean, there's a term that's used by somebody who wrote an article about these things. They talk about vicarious learning. And you get, within any group, you get the people who are constantly posting, and then you get people who learn from that around the edges. So, and I don't think that you can force it. But I mean, if your tasks are exciting and interesting enough, then people will engage. I mean, the one task that, I mean, it's completely kind of irrelevant really to the course. The one task that really got the students going at one point was a question about their hobbies, and I just threw that in as a kind of initial activity at the beginning of a course unit, and it ran and ran throughout the whole of the semester. And it got them in, and it got everybody talking about their hobbies, and then while they were in talking about their hobbies, they would then sort of post about the material as well. So, it's partly about how you kind of set it up and kind of create the atmosphere and build those things. But if you've got large groups, you do need the resources to actually make those work. There's no way that this can happen without, there being enough resourcing to go around to actually do that. And I think that's something that universities really have to, think about, or any kind of educational institution.
Question.
Yeah.
I've been using most of these tools for many years, and I went to a teaching second life, etc. I went to look at the Cert Ed course recently, and the teachers were actively told, don't turn your tablets on when you're doing your work, don't turn your phone on. I think there's a lot of sluggishness in education at the moment, in picking all these things up. The tools are out there, but people seem frightened of them. Even the teacher training courses, they tell them, stay away from this kind of stuff while you're on the course. This is when they're supposed to be doing the project. So I think the education system itself needs to pick this stuff up a lot faster than it's doing at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is, I mean, one of the things I didn't actually mention was that most of these tools are mobile compatible as well. So that if you do have students who are using mobile technologies, they can use any of these materials on them as well. I mean, you're referring more to sort of schools, and certainly there are many more restrictions in a school. But does an average academic? Yeah, but I'm. Yeah, okay, but I was just thinking about in a typical kind of lecture within a university. I imagine a lot of the students would come in with technology that they could use. I may be wrong about that because I don't do lectures in that kind of way. So, but yeah.
Do you have any examples of synchronous learning by the students? I teach a lot of my work in labs, practical sessions, and in those situations, the students I give them sort of step-by-step procedures. You do this, then you do that, and they understand it perfectly. It's all well written out. But once I change the parameters and give them something new to do, that's based on that, they completely fail. So I've got to be there, standing behind them, making sure that they're actually on the right path. And so that kind of synchronous learning in a lab situation, I find it really hard to translate to a distance learning situation, because unless I've actually seen what they're doing, guiding them through the process, it's very hard to do. And I've tried giving them step-by-step procedures which they can understand within a particular context. As soon as that context changes a little bit, they're lost. So you kind of need that continuous feedback as they're learning. But I can't see, I I don't know of any examples of distance learning in that sort of practical lab context.
Well, there are quite a few examples in Second Life, I have to say. I mean, we had a session here a couple of weeks ago, and somebody from the University of Leicester was talking about exactly the sort of things that you talked about. And they mocked up the labs in Second Life, and they used that in that kind of way. And they were there, you know, in the environment. So there's nothing to stop that. That was actually done with synchronous groups in the way that you're talking about. But there's nothing to stop that happening at a distance if you're using tools like that. I'm not saying it's not challenging. And I've seen presentations at distance learning conferences where people actually work remotely on lab equipment. So there are particular bits of lab equipment, incredibly expensive bits of lab equipment that people buy at a university, and then a number of different people from around the world work on that stuff remotely. But they probably do have a tutor sort of supporting them in the particular context where they're doing the learning, but the technology is remote. So there are various solutions that people have tried, but I'm not sure that they work in that kind of way. But you could use different kinds of synchronous tools like Adobe Connect or something like that, and actually look at what people are doing. But I imagine that's probably not a very efficient use of an academic's time when you have a group like that. So, but again, there might be other people around the room who've got much more experience. People are asking me questions that are a little bit out of my comfort zone when it comes to sort of science. So if people have those experiences, maybe they want to share them.
No? Are there any more questions for Gary? Yeah, loads of questions. Good.
Is it difficult to gauge how much presence to have on something like Facebook? You want to encourage collaboration between students, and then if as a tutor you have too much presence, then you may be a barrier to that.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's very interesting. Again, I've seen a shift, I think, in the way that students actually engage with material in the last 3 or 4 years, and I think that a lot of that is to do with social media. And even if we're not using Facebook as a way of supporting our students, they're using it themselves. And I wouldn't want to go into those spaces because they're actively using those kinds of tools. So I'm somebody who doesn't go in. If I think a conversation is going okay, a forum is developing, I don't interfere with it. I will go in and summarize things, or if I see something that I think needs sort of correction or development, then or I recommend an article or whatever it happens to be. But if it's going on okay and the students are engaging with it, I don't engage. I become the guide on the side, as it were. And there's one particular course unit that I'd looked through the forum postings last week, and I thought, if I say something, it's going to destroy this. They were just really getting on with it themselves. So I thought, relating to the task was working really well, and they were getting on with it. They were generating ideas. Why would I want to say anything? So I think there is a certain problem with people getting too active. I mean, one of the postings I noticed the other day from one of the students was talking about the fact that the tutor must support and engage with the students. And I was thinking, well, actually, I'm not so sure I'm convinced about that. In terms of that, and perhaps it makes it more manageable, but it's setting up the task in the right way to start with. And I think that with the current generation of students that are coming into the universities now, they've got those kind of skills. They have the sort of skills from the social media. They understand, they get distance learning, they get blended learning, and so they engage much more actively than they certainly used to. Whereas I think maybe 10 years ago, I had to actively drive forums and get people to engage. These days, at the moment anyway, I don't feel that that's necessary. And I can see one of our current students in the back. You might like to ask her what she thinks. So you'd like to wave, Kayla, and sort of identify yourself. You might like to ask her what she thinks about my tutoring style on one of the course units. So,
do you need to leave the room first?
yeah, I mean, well, no, I wasn't saying that you have to sort of say that, in open, but, you can talk to her about her experiences as a learner.
Okay.
Yeah. I think, yes, there's a potential problem with that. I mean, the courses that I'm engaged in are about technology and learning. All right, so I use a much broader range, so I'm just trying to illustrate. I'm not suggesting you have to use all of these tools. I mean, it was an interesting question from the back about, well, how much do you actually use Blackboard, really, Gary? And in a sense, you could embed a limited number of these quite efficiently and effectively into a Blackboard space. But still, the basic principle that, I mean, what I like about Google presentation is that I can update this and it automatically updates across all of the different sites where this presentation is. So I only have to do it once. Whereas if I do it as a PowerPoint, I've got to change it on the PowerPoint. I've then got to upload it to the space where it's being delivered, and then I've got to probably delete the old one because, it kind of gets confused and all those kinds of things. Whereas here, I just simply go in and I change it and it's done. And the same with the YouTube. The YouTube wasn't working. I just delete it. I sit at my laptop. I talk to it for 10 minutes and then I re-upload it. So you probably want to sort of limit the number of tools you start with and make it consistent for the students. Mine are a bit different, if you like, but at the end of the day, I think, if you decide that we want to deliver, our materials in using these kinds of tools, I think the way that I do it here makes it much easier than it would be if you try to use all sorts of sort of separate tools like PDFs. I mean, we still upload things like PDFs and Word documents and whatever, don't we? And those are different sort of formats too. So.
Okay, one more question and then we'll have to
It might be a question just for you, Gary, but I was just wondering, do the University of Manchester have people that check that staff and students aren't loading things or essentially publishing things that they shouldn't be publishing because of copyright laws?
Yes, I mean, certainly, it depends on where you're talking about. Certainly, yes, there are prohibitions for people doing that, and certainly we need to abide by copyright. And I would certainly, work to make sure my students didn't do that, and I, engage with them quite harshly about those sorts of things.